Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Inside the Birds TV with Adam and Kaplan and Jeff Mosher, presented, of course, by DraftKings Sportsbook. And you know what? We bring him on so much, we may have to start putting him on the payroll, Adam, but just don't tell him. Don't say that. Obviously, with the Eagles hiring a new coach, we wanted to bring back Joe Banner, former Eagles president, former Browns president, really to kind of talk, Joe, about not just the hire, but Adam and I want you to really talk about the process itself. I think a lot of fans don't know what a typical head coaching interview is like. So we want to get into the specifics. You've been through several of them with both the Eagles and the Browns. So first of all, thanks for coming back. Good to have you on.
My pleasure. Always good to be with you guys. A lot going on.
Yes, definitely a lot going on. I'll remind everybody to download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app right now and use the promo code ITB to get all of your sign-up bonuses. That's promo code ITB to get all your sign-up bonuses only at DraftKings Sportsbook. So, Joe, you've been through a bunch of head coaching interviews in your life. I'm sure some have similar components and some are very different. So, what is it that take us inside what a typical head coaching interview is like?
Well, the answer to that depends a lot on what you're looking for. So I'll kind of just speak to the specifics, in my time at the Eagles and the searches I did. Because, I've spoken to teams that spend a tremendous amount of time doing things like walking through the coach's plan for training camp, just to really, check all these things, his schedule for the year, these kinds of things. But I personally, in the search I was part of, we never spent any time on that. So I'll really speak to that because I think you need to define what you're looking for. So, for example, in our cases, we were always looking for somebody who's a really strong leader. We were looking for somebody that could hire a great staff and manage them. We were looking for somebody who really understood the importance of detail and, be really buttoned up, not flying by the seat of your pants. We were looking for somebody that had a very, very strong belief in a particular philosophy. We didn't care what the philosophy was, but we thought it was really difficult to lead if you didn't have real clarity about where you were taking people and why. So Jeff and I may have had our preferences to how we like to see the game played, but that didn't come into play in the search. What we wanted was somebody that could actually lead the team in a direction. You can't do that unless you have real clarity. So we would be talking a lot about, what is your leadership philosophy? How did you come about it? Who have you worked for that you felt you learned about, leadership? We talk about coaches, and we liked names, but we weren't focused on the names. We were focused on, why are those the people you're interested in? What about them makes you think that those are people? And they could talk about scheme or teaching skills, whatever it was, but we felt we were learning a lot from what they were choosing to talk about and then how they chose to talk about it. So what you should do, in my opinion, is zero in on the 3 or 4 things you think are most important in the coach, and then have a really wide range conversation, deep, shallow, just kind of all over the place on those issues instead of getting into all the, if you can't trust a guy to put together the plan for training camp, you shouldn't even be interviewing him. So spending a lot of time, in my mind, on a topic like that is just, a waste of precious time.
Joe, in 1999, when you interviewed Andy Reid, now I think you told me that you interviewed him more than once, and you just talked about leadership. What about Andy's leadership and his discussion of that in that interview, or maybe over a series of 2? What led you to believe that that's the kind of guy you were looking for?
Well, to be honest, some of it is just a feel when somebody walks in the room. Do they have a presence? Do they have a command? Is there a strength about them? So you got to cover those intangibles. And then just like I was talking about, talk to us about your belief in leadership. How did you come to those beliefs? Who have you worked for? And he was a huge fan of Laval Edwards. Remember the coach at BYU for many years. Yeah. So he talked about what he learned from him and why he thought he was a great leader. He talked about working with Mike Holmgren, what he thought made him successful as a leader. So it's really a combination of something you just feel instinctively or not, and then their actual description of what they believe in and where it came from. And you didn't have to agree with what they were saying. You just were looking for the thought process behind it. Did it make sense? Had they really thought it through, or was just kind of an instinctive thing? And we always felt like a strong leader was studying how to be a leader. So if they couldn't rattle off some books they've read or people they've met with to pick their brain on how they've been a successful leader, then we were worried we were just hearing a good interview versus somebody that was really a good leader.
How does the vetting process go? Do you find out a lot about these guys before they sit down with you? And do you do more after? For example, if you really like someone and they blew you away and you weren't sure what you were expecting and you feel like that might be the guy, how do you kind of go from there as far as getting outside sources input on them?
the first part, you really start with a very big list. You may have as many as 25 or 30 people that you think are at least doing some research on. And, as you do that, you realize, how the hell did that guy get on the list? But, it's worth starting with as wide a funnel as you can and then narrowing it down. So that's what we do. And then we usually try to get down to 10 people we really spent like some serious time on, and then kind of a top 5 candidates that we actually wanted to meet in person. And it isn't uncommon at all that what you find when you meet them is different than what you expected from the research. Now, sometimes it's just a little iteration. Like you thought they'd be a B and they're an A, you thought they'd be a B and they're a C. But occasionally you get into somebody, and I'm not going to give you the name, but we actually went into an interview cycle where we were very confident who we were going to hire based on the research. And literally 10 minutes into the interview, we spoke afterwards, we both realized this isn't the guy. So you occasionally run into one where the difference is just really dramatic. And you're like, wow, we might have talked to the wrong people or focused on the wrong research. And then if you do find somebody that kind of jumps up and surprises you a little bit, you're back on the phones. Trying to find, you look through every player that's, played under him, every agent that's had players, even media people that have developed a relationship with the player. You try to go back and talk to as many people as you possibly can, because you are nervous about hiring the person that's a great interview versus the person that's actually a great head coach. Because if you're a great salesman, you can come off great in an interview. And you're really trying to protect against that. So if somebody surprises you in one direction or the other, if it's the wrong direction, you're probably done with them. But if they surprise you to the upside, you can go back and really double or triple the number of people you spoke to, really press them to get, the truth. See if there's some consistent theme you're now hearing from people that you hadn't heard earlier, because maybe you only made 5 calls instead of 15 calls.
So just taking that to the next step here, I know. At least I'd heard that Nick Sirianni knocked the interview out of the park. But you just talked about, it's great if the guy did well in the interview, but it's more about leadership. So going back to '99 with Andy Reid, A, how soon did you know? Did you and Jeffrey know in that first interview that this is probably going to be the guy if you did? And B, did you think you needed to have a second interview? Because I think you said you did have one. And how necessary was it to have that second interview?
Well, we felt very quickly that Andy was the guy. That doesn't mean you're right, though. It just means something feels really right, and the things you're hearing fit what you want, and then hopefully you're getting deeper to cut through appearance versus substance. And we did have a second interview. I think we spent about 9 hours total face to face with Andy between the 2 interviews. I think the first was like 5 hours, the second was 4 or 5 hours, including having dinner together, which was a little bit more casual, where you get maybe people take their guard down a little bit. And listen, I would have had another interview if we could, even though we were very confident. The more time you're making a decision that at least for the next 3 or 4 years, in all probability, is going to determine the direction and success of your franchise, and frankly, your own happiness. So the more time you can get, the more information you have, the better chance you get it right. So the less time you have, frankly, the less confident you can be that you really challenged all the kind of perceptions you had and really cut underneath them to really see the substance and the meat. So I would interview as many times as I could get away with it without risking losing other candidates that I may like. You're in that juggle. We want to move quickly. We want to hire assistant coaches. We don't want to lose somebody we like to another team. On the other hand, you want to spend enough time to make sure that you're really confident in the decision. So I would do as many interviews as the process allowed me to have the time. In this case, it may have been one of the challenges when they delayed their search, at least in terms of when the rest of the league started doing their searches. It may have lessened the opportunity for a second or third or even lengthier interviews. Now, I don't think they proceeded without feeling confident. But I can tell you, even if you spend a lot of time with a candidate, you're still wishing you could have even more.
It sounds like, from what Adam and I have heard, Joe, that there were several people involved in the interview process when they were searching for their head coach. Maybe as up to 5 or 6 people. Is that normal to have that many people, or is that something maybe COVID related, where you're getting everybody, as many opportunities to see someone as you can, because you may not be able to see them more as much as you normally do?
Yeah, I think it's within the range of normal. We used to try to keep it to 4 because we didn't want to overwhelm the coach and have him kind of just feel like, questions were just shooting at him from all over the place. You wanted to really kind of have a back and forth dialogue. So we felt if we got larger than 4, we risked that. But certainly having 5 or 6 is well within the range of normal and what you see around the league, probably not COVID driven. And usually, by the way, there's some time. I would be surprised if, like, Howie didn't spend some time just one-on-one with the candidate. I'm sure Jeff spent some one-on-one time with the candidate. So you have kind of the group meeting, then you have some breakout time, always with the owner. I've never heard of a head coach being hired without having some one-on-one time with the owner, sometimes also with the general manager, the president, whatever's appropriate in that particular building. I don't know what happened here. I'd be totally shocked if Jeff didn't spend some one-on-one time in addition to kind of the group interview time.
Joe, how soon after Andy Reid was hired did you know, 6 months, 3 months, a year, or 2 seasons? How soon did you know, okay, did you turn to Jeff and say, okay, I think we got this right? Was it right away, or did it take you a while to kind of see what kind of coach he would be?
Yeah, so the answer is it was right away. And again, you can be wrong, but we were very confident. And I'll tell you, it was kind of a little nuanced situation, but it was very, very significant to us. You work with people, and you quickly get a sense of how sure are they about themselves. And are they setting up any kind of excuses, explanations if things don't go well? And it's a very subtle thing. But it was so obvious immediately that failing had never even crossed Andy's mind. I mean, he was so confident, which was contagious. And there was no, because of that, there was nothing you saw where, he was setting up, well, we're in cap trouble, or we don't have good enough wide receivers. There was nothing in the conversations that were anything but forward-looking and positive. So it didn't feel like he was setting up the possibility for failure, and it wasn't his fault, which, as you guys know, is quite common in the NFL. So that, in addition to the interview, gave us confidence that we had the right guy, and we just had to support him properly, trust him, empower him, be a partner when he needed to be, and just be a supporter when that's when he needed, and give him some time. And even in the first seasons there at 5-11, we were even much more confident than we'd been after the interview.
So you're saying it was even before Andy made George Hegeman push a blocking sled all over the field that
yes,
you were confident.
And by the way, he didn't specifically tell us he may do that, but in the talk with him, it was not surprising at all when that actually, happened. I mean, Andy, and if you think back about it, he did exactly this. He wanted to kind of establish kind of who's in charge, who's the boss, and at the same time, you can trust me and I care about you as a person from day one. And then as time went on, you saw him pull back a little bit on the hard ass part of that.
Right.
But he now established that people knew, don't mess with me. I mean what I say. I'm not going to be a bad guy. I'm not going to over micromanage you, but I do mean what I say. So just live within that, and then we can get along great. You'll feel respected and treated like a man and all the rest of that stuff.
So tell us what you know about Nick Sirianni.
So I personally don't know him well, but I do know a lot of people. I think the way you're hearing it characterized in the media is pretty much what they say. I mean, a very likable guy, strong presence, smart guy, obviously an offensive mind. He's going to, be challenged in that he's been working with people like Frank. He's had quarterbacks like, Phillip Rivers. So he hasn't really faced some of the challenges that a head coach faces. The question is, can he now take that to the next level? It's one of the reasons it's so hard to project somebody who's a coordinator to become a head coach, because it's really a very different skill set. People I talk to are very hopeful that he'll make that adjustment and be successful. But, that's the part if you're in the interview room, you have a strong opinion about right now. But truthfully, none of us can really know for sure. Even his friends can't really know for sure. I mean, when is it going to kick in that he's maximizing what he is? We've seen guys like Kevin Stefanski this year going to Cleveland. Guy spent 14 years in one organization, only one as a coordinator. His own people weren't promoting him. Then he gets a shot to be a head coach, steps in, does a phenomenal job, establishes himself as a leader. And you're looking around going, what were they Vikings thinking about for the other 13 years? So can Nick and other people like Nick step into that next position and immediately kind of assert themselves and prove that the next level isn't too big for them and the difference in skill set they actually possess?
So off that, Joe, how important is it for a guy like Sirianni to have not called plays? He was an offense coordinator who didn't call plays. So does it matter? How much does a play calling matter to be a head coach?
Listen, here's what I believe. I believe that experience is very overrated, but that does not mean it doesn't matter. So I would rather he had some play calling experience, but it wouldn't affect, if I was in that room, whether or not we'd hire him as head coach would be irrelevant to me, whether he ever called plays or not. mean, he's established himself as somebody who has the ability to do that. Now he has to step in the shoes and actually do it. And it's not the primary thing you're looking for when you hire him. So the fact that personally, and you can look at my hires, everything from Andy Reid to Howie Roseman, people I've brought in the marketing department, trainers that we brought in, we were never focused on experience, which again, it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. I always felt like if somebody had some experience, that was a benefit. But if you didn't have experience, you may be even more determined to prove you can take the next step. You may have more passion and intensity because you really feel like either you have something to prove or somebody bet on you and you want to prove them right for betting on you. So, I mean, in this situation, that doesn't concern me at all. And in most situations, it wouldn't concern me. I'm sure he articulated his vision about whether he intends to call the plays or how he was going to make the decision at the right time, whether to call plays or not. And hopefully had a good explanation for whichever he was going to do and why. But the fact that he hadn't done it would not bother me.
Interesting. Andy Reid, I don't think had interviewed with anybody when you guys hired him. Anybody else, correct?
Right.
All right.
Yep.
And we know Doug didn't interview with anybody else either. And those wound up being two of the franchise's, better hires. Whereas you look at the Chip Kelly, a lot of people interviewed Chip Kelly or wanted Chip Kelly, and that didn't work out as well. Is Nick Sirianni's hiring, in your opinion, a little bit of cause and effect from past hirings here and how it's worked out?
You try not to just be a creature of repeating, your MO.
Right.
So I hope that isn't what they did. I actually think it's more likely that, Doug got that job in large part because of the enthusiasm with which Andy recommended him. I think Nick got this job in part because of the enthusiasm with which Frank Reich recommended him. So finding people you can really trust that know somebody really well should matter, and I think did matter. And I hope that that's, what they're focused on, because I think that would be, obviously that's not the end of the research. But if you have somebody you know that well, that's that intimately involved with this person and is telling you they think they can take the next step and be a successful head coach, that's important. It's hard to find truth-telling references in the NFL. I mean, you never forget, you're competing with these other 31 teams. Your goal really isn't to make them better. Right. On the other hand, you do have some situations and relationships where people call you and, you want to help them. So they know in a case like Andy, he's going to shoot them straight. They know in a case like Frank Reich, he's going to shoot them straight. So that takes some of the worry about, are we just running into his friends or people that are looking to help people grow? Or are we really getting a straight answer on, what he's like? I mean, I can tell you that from knowing some of the people they spoke to, anybody questioning the extent of the Eagles' research, the decision time will tell. The extent of the research and the number that they talked to, I can just tell you, was really extensive and is good or better than most teams I've seen in a similar process.
Well, if I could follow up real quick, though, on that same vein about the comfort zone. I mean, as we reported, it was kind of a decision between a guy like Nick Sirianni and a guy like Josh McDaniels, and each come with a different set of circumstances around them. We obviously know what Josh McDaniels has been through. Is that where maybe the comfort zone kind of crept in? Like, I've succeeded with one type of guy, I'm not sure about this other type of guy. That had to be part of at least the weighing of the decision, no?
No, I think that's right. And listen, when you do a coaching search, you're trying to be aggressive and open-minded, but you're also, risk averse, because the consequence of getting it wrong is just so large. So the fact that Nick probably came with a clearer set of references and a cleaner history, where Josh probably came with a much more complex and even in some cases concerning history, but maybe had more upside. I think it's totally reasonable and practical to make the decision to go with somebody that you also really believe would be good, maybe not exactly the same upside, but also takes out a lot of the downside. I think that's a reasonable thing to do, and it was probably the decision they were looking at, just knowing, what people are saying about both guys.
Joe, one of the most underrated parts of Andy Reid, I think, just as an observer, is his ability to manage and coach his coaches. Whereas with Doug Peterson, I think that was an issue for him, despite how well he did as a head coach here. We won a Super Bowl. I think it probably could have ended a little bit better in that area. Well, your observations work with Andy for so many years. Why was he so good in that area?
Well, first of all, he's got incredible people skills. I mean, he's one of these guys in a business that almost everybody has some lovers and haters. He has almost all lovers. Why is it? He treats people with respect. He's as honest as you can be. You always feel like he's on your side, trying to help you, trying to make you better. Same time, obviously looking out for the collective good. My experience with people is if you show them that you care about them and they completely feel like they can trust you, you can go a long way towards becoming a really good leader, hiring a really good staff and managing it effectively. It doesn't mean there'll never be any bumps in the road. It doesn't mean you'll never make any mistakes in hiring. It doesn't mean you look back at some situation, wish you managed it differently. But if you're doing those things consistently, and Andy is as pure on this as anybody I've met in my life, not just in football, you're going to win people over. They're going to be rooting for you. They're going to be wanting to be part of whatever you're doing. They're going to follow you when you're trying to lead. They're going to be there in the tough times, not just the good times. And that's what he brings out of people. And frankly, that's what he looks for in people.
We talk a lot about not just Andy, but that coaching staff that he was able to put together very early on and maintain continuity with. And you've got so much success there, right? And with Ron Rivera and Sean McDermott and Spags and Juan Castillo and Brad Childress. I mean, we could go on about all the good assistants we have. It seems, Joe, it would be very important for Nick here as he's trying to assemble a staff. And there's difficulties, right? When you're doing that at a time like this, because guys are under contract, you don't always get all the people that you want. So I'll ask you, A, how difficult is it to be a young first-year head coach and get your guys in? And B, how important is continuity now? Giving people who are already on the staff a little chance, because the Eagles have been shuffling position coaches and assistant coaches in and out for quite a while here. And I think that that's impacted their ability to develop at certain positions.
Yeah, so my view on continuity, which again may be a little different, is once you've got the right people in all the places that matter most, continuity is invaluable. Until then, continuity is a mistake. In other words, if you get too comfortable with the people around you because you like them, you trust them, they're loyal to you, et cetera, you're not necessarily putting together the best possible team of people to drive success. So, I think change is good. Now, degree matters. So if you're making too many changes and you're making them every year, or you're making them at the same position, like we've seen in some of the upper levels of the offensive staff, that's a problem because it just means you aren't hiring the right people in the first place. So you got to get the hire right. And then continuity is just incredibly important and drives success. But if you jump to continuity too soon, you actually may be locking in a degree of failure. So I'm very careful with this topic because I both think it's incredibly important. The fact that we were together with Andy for 14 years, and there were some changes under him, but they were not that often. They were usually because people were getting promoted. That's a huge positive. But, we didn't get everything right on everybody we hired. And if we were jumping to continuity too quickly, we would have, kind of locked in some people that probably wouldn't have been able to, get us to the success level that, we had when we were all together.
Joe, one thing you did tell me years ago, and I thought it was really fascinating because it's not the way usually people look at it, but in a way you're probably going to be right, is you didn't necessarily think it mattered whether guys had worked together before. I remember you telling me you actually felt it would be better if these guys did know each other, right? Was that correct?
Yeah. No, listen, where I was in complete charge, not just managing people, I made a rule that you couldn't hire people you'd previously worked with. Because it was the only way in my mind to assure people were doing a thorough search to find the best person, not just somebody they were comfortable with. Now, you can't do that with a coaching staff. I never went to Andy Reid and said that.
Yeah.
Although Andy hired very few people that he worked with. He hired a lot of people he knew and got to know over the years and had talked to and felt like, they had a lot of upside and would fit in with what he was doing. So I didn't go into a coaching staff and tell them that. But I did always push hard for people really doing thorough searches and not, the lowest common denominator is hire somebody I know that I know will be loyal to me. I tried to discourage that as much as I possibly could. And in some areas, I literally prohibited it. In other areas, I just kind of elevated people's sense of thinking about it and trying to just make sure you're true to finding the best possible people. We owe it to each other. We owe it to the 90-odd players who are going to show up in training camp and risk their health and well-being. We owe it to the owner who's all paying us, a lot of money to do these jobs. We have to find the best people. And if we're just hiring people we know we're comfortable with, I actually think it's predictive when you look at new coaches that are hired. If they're hiring too many people that come from their background, doesn't mean they're going to fail. But to me, it's a little bit of a warning sign. If you're seeing people that are going out and doing a bunch of interviews and putting together kind of a staff that comes from a lot of different places, some of whom they knew and some of whom they didn't, I always feel a little bit better about that. There are exceptions on both sides, but for me, that's a little bit of a preference to somebody doing that. And then I at least feel like, okay, they're really focused on getting the best staff they possibly can.
So along those lines, his Nick Sirianni's offensive coordinator comes over from the Chargers, where he's really been OC for 1 year. His defensive coordinator comes over the Colts, who has not yet been a defensive coordinator. This is a pretty young trio here. Do you think it's essential that Nick at least looks into bringing in a senior offensive assistant or somebody on the coaching staff that's, spent 15, 20 years in the game, may have been a head coach or a coordinator, especially because he's young and this is his first time?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is, do I think he needs to? No. Do I think it could benefit him if he found the right person? Is yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, listen, I don't mean this about Nick. It's any first-year head coach. They don't know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They've talked to other head coaches who've given him some picture, but until you're walking in those shoes, you don't know. I mean, how much time am I spending on media stuff? How many stuff am I spending with, the marketing department? How much time am I spending just managing my staff? I mean, they don't know that yet. They think they have an opinion on it. They may get some of it right. They may get some of it wrong. But if you have somebody that's actually been through it, who you really trust and you can sit down with and kind of pick their brain or get their guidance in advance, if it's the right person, the right relationship, I think it's helpful. Do I think he needs to do that to be successful? I don't. Do I think if he found the right person, it would benefit him? I do.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah. I want to ask you one more thing before we get out of here, Joe.
Yep.
It's more of a, I would say it's not a difficult question, but it's something Adam and I have talked about, and I want your opinion on this. The Eagles, over the last 20 years, have been very successful. They've had a couple of bad down years, and it's resulted in some change, but they generally tend to regroup fairly quickly. But they also encounter some obstacles now that they're not, I would say, are kind of unique. The quarterback situation they've got, a first-time head coach, a one-year cap situation that's not very promising. Do you believe that this is a crossroads kind of time for the franchise and team? Or do you think it's just going to be like how it's been, where they'll figure it out and pick it up?
Well, I do think they'll figure it out, but I do think that listen, Howie did his own press conference and acknowledged some mistakes that if you look back, he could do some things differently. Doug, before he left, said the same thing. I mean, I get the same sense listening to Jeff talk, that he realizes with hindsight, some things could have been done differently. So I think they've kind of used up their room for mistakes. They now have to kind of move into a kind of a consistent higher batting average. Because when you get in a phenomenal roster, and let's say you have a weak draft, it doesn't kill you. When you get to the point where your roster is at least in transition, if not challenged, if you continue to make some mistakes, it can really get ugly. So I think they're at a crossroads in the sense that they've, used up the slack in the rope, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And the batting average going forward has to be better than it's been on the last couple of years. Now, I'm very hopeful they can do that, and we've seen them do it in the past with these people in place. So I'm not negative about that, as I know some others are. But I do think that the time is now, with kind of a fresh start with the head coach, maybe some changes in what he likes in players or what he's looking for to kind of increase the batting average, is the phrase I like to use, and just kind of have a more consistent hit rate.
Sure. Excellent stuff, Joe. We thank so much for coming on. Again, this is probably your third or fourth time. So I imagine sometime in a few weeks and months, we'll be having you back on again to talk about the draft or the franchise. Really appreciate everything that you've done for Inside the Birds.
My pleasure. Always great being with both of you guys.
All right. We'll catch up with you again soon. Thanks, everybody, for watching the latest Inside the Birds TV with Adam Kaplan and Jeff Mosher. We'll catch you on the next one.